All right, everybody. I love Reggie. He's got it. Great son and great man, and I'm so glad he was able to join us today. We have our next speaker coming up is ready to speak. I think he's a lawyer's lawyer. Nick Cox has an amazing career. I would love if you would to, when you get a chance during the break, to read his bio in today's guide in your pamphlet. He has just done about everything you can do in the law. He's been a professor. He's been a state attorney. He works now as a statewide Florida prosecutor. He's an amazing man, an amazing attorney, and he also has had his own journey with Alzheimer's disease and his family. And I'd like to bring him up now and have him share with you some of that story. So please welcome Mr. Nick Cox.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks,
Oh, these lights, they're killing me. Holy smoke. Well, thank you very much for having me here. When I was asked to come over here and do this, I unhesitatingly said I'd be glad to do it because my travails with the disease of Alzheimer's has really been telling to me. And anything I can do to pass on my experiences, because I had to rely on a lot of people I knew that had gone through this experience to kind of walk me through it. As Sean told you, I'm the statewide prosecutor. And in my time working as a lawyer, I've been a state prosecutor for years. I was the regional director of the Department of Children and Families for 3 or 4 years. I've been in state government forever. And a lot of that work has been devoted towards working on people who have disabilities, elder abuse task forces, everything like that. In fact, in particular, when I was at the Attorney General's office back in 1997, I was in charge of an elder protection team. So when my mother started having issues several years ago, I thought, I know what I'm doing. I'm not trained like many of you who may be here or any of the people that are putting this on, but I thought, I know what I'm doing. I can deal with this. I've been talking to people for years about how to protect their grandparents, how to protect their parents. And so I really kind of felt like I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be on top of this. I had friends who practiced elder law, like Sean. And so if there was a legal issue, even though I'm a criminal prosecutor, if there's a legal issue, I got people I can go to who can walk me through it and who can help me do it. And so I thought, I'm okay. I'm in good shape. I'm an only child, which means I'm spoiled, and I love being up here talking to y'all. Because in the end, not only am I a lawyer, I'm an only child that knows it's all about me. And this lady I'm going to talk to you about, when I was still 45 years old, and no one's allowed to count, but when I was still 45, the sun still rose and set on my rear end, so to her. But I'm an only child, and I thought, though, I'm in good shape. I know what I'm doing, because I've talked about this and I've dealt with it, mainly from a fraud aspect, but I can deal with this. I've got resources. I had no freaking idea what I was getting into. And it was really sad. My father, God rest his soul, my dad passed away about 6-7 years ago, and my father for years had been saying my mom has memory issues. I never really noticed it. I didn't live with her, but my mom used to do crosswords and everything, and I used to think, gee, I hope mom's going to be okay. I hope this isn't the early signs of just like a dementia, I'm going to speak very unprofessionally here, but like a typical dementia or just a typical loss that some of us get as we might age. And then after my father died, and I had to take a much more active role with my mother, I started realizing Dad wasn't kidding. There was a real memory loss. But we could deal with the memory loss. So I moved Mom into a nice condo, everything was going well, and I thought we're doing okay. And then one day we had a car wreck, and a police officer called me, and being a prosecutor, I knew the police officer, and he saw it was my mom, and he called me. And he said, hey, Nick, I'm out here on a wreck with your mom. She's okay. But wow, is she confused. She doesn't know what's going on, and she's had no head trauma. So I'm kind of like, uh-oh, here we go. So that was the beginning of it for me. That was when I had to deal with the driving issue. And I'm sure y'all have heard about it. I'm sure you've heard friends talk about it. But with my mother, that was her, as with most people, that was her freedom. And that was the first time I started learning about lying. I am not going to try to fool anybody here into believing that as a child, I didn't lie to this woman daily, because I did. And if I got caught, Dad took care of it, but regardless, I lied like a banshee when I was a kid. But, you get older. I didn't lie to my mom. She's one of my best friends, the others being my dad and my wife. But I didn't lie to my mom. And as we began dealing with these problems, and especially with the driving, people used to talk to me, people that were thank you for turning that down a little. I'd like to be able to see people. As we started dealing with it, I started hearing the terms therapeutic fibbing. And I thought, and I laughed about it too, but I've learned, my experience is I've learned there's a lot to that. Because with my mother, it was a lot easier at times to fib, to lie, in order to do what's right for her. And I won't tell you I like it. I'm a prosecutor. I'm all about justice and the right thing. I'm not saying that lightly. That stuff's really important to me. And I didn't like it with my mom, but it was a way for me to deal with the problem. So I confess, I lie to my mom, and I still lie to her to this day, because it's the easiest way to deal with problems, and it started with the driving. That was awful. That was really awful. But fortunately, the State Department of Motor Vehicles began sending letters saying she needed medical reviews and everything else, and it made my job easy. And ultimately, I sent her to a class that I knew she was going to fail for driving. She failed it, and she thought the people were mean, and she never wanted to get on the roads again. So that night, I popped on my knees and thanked God for the Department of Motor Vehicles, which I have never done before. Hey, that's cool. Applause. Put the signs down, sister. 20 minutes is gone, okay? I'm staying here forever. You give a lawyer an audience like this, I'm not going anywhere. Mom was still living on her own, though, and she was in a condo, and we started hearing from neighbors that Mom was showing up to other people's doors and knocking on doors. Sometimes she'd walk into their apartment thinking it was hers. Sometimes she would knock on their doors asking them for things. My mom is a sweetheart. I don't know if y'all have met Taylor Penvos from Arden Courts. That's where my mom is now. And Taylor and anyone from Arden Courts will tell you, this lady is still a sweetheart. And she was being as nice as she could be, but I wouldn't be real fond of the idea of someone just popping in my condominium or coming over bothering me. And so that became a problem, and things like that started to happen. And then I started learning that my mom started wandering. She wanted to go to Publix. She lived in South Tampa. She wanted to go to Publix, and we started learning that Mom was walking there, and it was 3 miles away. We started hearing from a friend of ours who was driving down the street and saw my mother one day and said, your mother was waving at me and got me to pull over and asked me, didn't recognize him, and said, give me a ride home. So at that point, you can imagine I'm going, holy blank. I got a real safety issue here, and I'm dying. It's killing me. So the anxiety starts to set in because I'm starting to realize we gotta make a move. She's not safe. So we get a caregiver to come in. And with my mother, and this completely sweet woman loves her independence like anybody else does. And my mom, all of her life, does not like somebody to tell her what to do. We've noticed with the Alzheimer's, it's gotten worse. She's very, very defiant about that. We got a lady to come in to be a caregiver for her. We started out with her, 5 hours a day, then we went to 8 hours a day. It just went downhill quickly. My mother resented her. She would yell at her. My mother, who would never let a cuss word exit her mouth, would cuss at her. And we really started seeing the change in personalities. And then one day, I went over to my mom's house, because I would go over and see her, obviously, just about every day. And I went over to my mom's house, and I took some Chick-fil-A with me. And we're sitting in the living room, and we're eating Chick-fil-A. And she has a wall that was all mirrored in this place. And so she had her waffle fries, and she said, honey, do you want some more waffle fries? And I said, no, Mom, I'm fine. And she looked in the mirror and said, do you want them? And then I started realizing that my mom was becoming delusional. And then I started talking to my mom about it. And if there's any message for you, any of you who are dealing with this in your family who are not professionals, one thing I've learned is you got to talk to them. You got to be, it's one thing to be there, it's one thing to be with them all the time, but you got to talk to them to really understand what's happening. Because I didn't have an understanding until then. She was delusional. And as Dr. Steen, who I think you're going to meet in a few minutes, and for the record, she can speak about anything about my mother. HIPAA be damned. Let her talk. Can you tell I'm a lawyer? HIPAA. I started realizing how delusional she was, and Dr. Steen, who, when you all meet her, she was a godsend for my family. Dr. Steen realized that she was actually manic. Manic delusional is how she described it. I'm not a guy that's real big on medications. I don't believe in, let me take that back. I believe in medicine, don't get me wrong. I don't like the idea of medicating all the time. I don't like narcotics. You got to understand, right now as the statewide prosecutor, I've been leading the charge for Pam Bondi, the Attorney General. I've been leading the charge for her against prescription drug abuse. Medicines, to me, I take them and everything else, but you really got to need them for me to say they're okay. So when Dr. Steen started talking about things like Aricept and Seroquel and things like that, I'm going, hoo-hoo, doc, I don't know that I like doing all this with my mom. I learned very quickly, and my advice to those of you dealing with it is, don't resist it. That was my experience. Because once Dr. Steen got, 10 minutes, forget it. Once Dr. Steen, don't worry, I'm kidding. She's sitting there going, oh dear God, we're gonna be here till 6. Once Dr. Steen started putting my mom on her medications, the delusions went away. And as I told Dr. Steen, I said, I don't mind delusions if they're happy delusions. But my mom's experiences weren't happy. She was having delusions that my father was cheating on her. My father had passed, but my father was cheating on her. She had delusions that he was in bed with another woman. This is the kind of stuff that as a son who thought he knew what he was doing beforehand, but this stuff is breaking my heart. And my advice, and I don't know if I was asked to give advice, but I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to give unsolicited advice. Listen to the professionals. Listen to the docs. Dr. Steen really helped guide us through this and told us how to do it. We ultimately got my mother into an assisted living in South Tampa, and it was the same thing there. These people told me this is how you can deal with it. You gotta lie, you gotta do stuff like that, but this is what you need to expect, and this is how you deal with it. Because one thing I learned is when I leaned on the professionals, God knows it made my life easier. And remember, I'm dealing this as an only child. My wife treats my mom like her mother too, so I'm blessed with that, but it was really difficult. So my mom goes to assisted living. She's on the medication. Delusions are gone. Things are going pretty good. We go into independent living at first, and that ultimately became an assisted living program in the same facility. During the course of it, we decided, I'm a prosecutor. I always tell people with family that are in long-term care facilities, an important thing to do is be there and have eyes on them. The more often you're there, I hate to say this, especially with people sitting here that I deal with, but my advocacy has always been the more you're there, the better the care is. It's not my experience. I will tell you, I'm not marketing for anybody, but I'll tell you, my mom at Arden Courts has been a godsend. That place is wonderful. Sorry, Taylor, you didn't want me to say that, but I said it anyway. But I don't have that fear. However, I always tell people the more you're there, the better the care is, things like that. So we decided, instead of having the facility that she was at before Arden Courts give her medication, this was my first time having to do something like this. We asked my daughter, my 22-year-old daughter, who's going to be a gerontology in a master's program next year in gerontology. I'm like, this is great. We'll let Lindsay do it. So Lindsay would go in the morning, and she would make sure my mom was dressed and that her hygiene was good, because my mom started to get to the point where she didn't take good care of herself, didn't comb her hair, things like that. She would go there and she would make sure everything was good there. Then at night she would go back and she would make sure she took her Aricept, her Seroquel, the medication Dr. Steen gave her. I was shocked as we began doing this to learn that my oldest daughter, who was my mother's first grandchild, became the target of my mother. This woman who was an absolute sweetheart and a dear, and still is, but she resented my daughter so much for telling her what to do. Again, she liked her independence. She wanted her freedom. She didn't want someone to tell her what to do. But when Lindsay started doing it, bar the doors, Katie. And this is a granddaughter she loved, absolutely loved her. And it got to the point one time where she actually got physical with Lindsay and started pushing her and slapped her. And my granddaughter, who fortunately understands this because she does study gerontology, understood it. But first and foremost, my daughter was her granddaughter and loved her gram. And so it really hurt. But we learned how to deal with that. Again, we turned to the facility, asked him for help, asked him for direction. Ultimately, we had my daughter stop doing that because it was ripping her heart out too. Alzheimer's, I was telling Sean in the back, excuse my language, but Alzheimer's sucks. It's really awful. My mother's personality, if you met her now, you would fall in love with her. She's a sweetie, everything's great, the glass is half full, she laughs and everything else, but she has those moments where things aren't good. As we progressed in the assisted living facility, my mother was married to my father for just under 52 years. My mother, I can tell you, my mother was a teetotaler. My mother was a one-man woman. I can tell you, I'm not just saying that because my mom's wonderful, she's pure and all that. My mom was a one-man woman, period. And as we were at assisted living, they called me one day and they said, your mom's got a boyfriend. And I went, what? And I remember Leslie said to me, I shouldn't have told you that, you're mad. I'm like, no, I'm not mad, I'm in shock. I said, hey, if she's happy, I could care less. I could completely care less if she's happy. And so she had this boyfriend, and then I started learning the boyfriend would spend the night in her apartment and everything else. I'm happy because she's happy. Every day that she's happy is a good day. I can't worry. If I were my dad, I'd feel this. It's not disrespectful to my dad. I had to convince myself of that. It's not disrespectful. She's still alive. She's still got a life. She's got to enjoy it. Anything that she enjoys makes me happy. Then her boyfriend got moved to memory care. He had Alzheimer's too. And he got moved to memory care. So I'm like, oh dear God, how are we going to deal with it? Marvin's gone. And so I was worried about it. And they said, don't worry, Nick, we'll deal with it. And about 2 days later, I called them and I said, how's she dealing with Marvin? They said, well, pretty good. And I said, what do you mean? And Leslie's comment to me was, well, she's currently holding tryouts. This woman, who honest to God was a great little Catholic girl, pure as the driven snow, I'll just say it. I'm her power of attorney, I can say it. She was going at it with 3 men. So I'm like, okay, as long as she's happy and safe. But it was part of the shock that hit me. I mean, the things that were happening, well, you know, it hit that part of her brain where the physical demand was that much. And you know, I've had to convince myself to live with it because every day I want her to be just happy. Every day is a happy day is a win in my book. If my mom forgets me one day and doesn't remember who I am, as long as I see she's happy, I'm fine. And that's what you've got to convince yourself of. It's a horrible disease. The other thing that happened is after we were in assisted living for about 1.5 years, things started happening where she would walk into people's apartments. She would be walking around literally unclothed sometimes, not realizing where she was. She was having control issues, you know, with her functions. And things like that were happening. And we started realizing, okay, we got to move to memory care. And thank God for Arden Courts, because my experience with that was complete and total fear and anxiety about making the move. She was so resistant. She wanted to be independent. She didn't want to ever be in a situation where she had to be like in a nursing home or anything like that. My message on this, I promise I'll be done in a minute. My message on this is don't let the anxiety get to you until it really happens. And it's easier said than done. But if you ask Taylor, I don't know, has anyone met Taylor today? All right, good. I agree, thank God. Because Taylor kept on saying, Nick, it's going to be okay. Don't worry, I'm going to help you. And it's true. I spent weeks, and she'll tell you, I spent weeks worried sick about making this move and what my mom was going to do. And we walked her up there, and Taylor took her by the hand and took her in, and everything was fine. I was in shock how well it went. You know, don't waste anxiety until you really find out it's something you need to worry about, because it went fine. You know, at Arden Courts, for us, in her memory care, number one, find a place that you're comfortable with. You want to be as comfortable as your family member. It's what I was concerned with for my mom is a place that had a nice place where she could go outside and feed the squirrels or something. She loves feeding squirrels. She loves to go outside. I wanted it to be warm. I wanted it to be inviting. I wanted it to feel like a home, and that's what I found for her. But also for me, I found somewhere where I feel supported. You know, there's been days recently where I'm out of town. In fact, I'm leaving here and going to Orlando because we're doing a big operation right now, and I'm in trial sometimes for a month at a time, and I can't be there every day. I'm not worried about it. because I know these people, they support me, and I know they support my mom. I'll even go to the point of saying these people adore my mom. And I know that they do because I do, and she's a wonderful person. But when you choose a place like that, be sure you choose a place that you're as comfortable with as you think your family member will be. And you know, my last comment I would just say is don't shoulder this yourself. I mean, I'm an only child. Now again, I am married to a saint of a woman who loves my mother too, and I've had all that support as well, and my mom has had that support. But don't shoulder this yourself, because there's one thing I learned starting out this thing thinking, I am a lawyer and I know what I'm doing. Bull. Because when it's a family member, it's totally different. And whatever you do, listen to the people that know what they're doing. Find a good doctor. I tell you, Dr. Steen, my mother loves her to boot. And I mean, if my Dr. Steen says it, it's Bible. If I say it, I think she knows you're fibbing to me therapeutically. But Dr. Steen says it, let me tell you, it's Bible. She is convinced Dr. Steen has made her better. And it's been a really difficult road, but Dr. Steen has made it bearable. And Dr. Steen has made it as good as it can get. So find a good doctor, rely on that doctor, find professionals, and find a place for your family member to live that your family member is going to like, that they're going to feel comfortable in, but that you're going to feel comfortable with. Because your goal in the end of this thing, as I see it, your goal is, yes, number one, to provide for your family member, make them happy, make them safe, but it's also to rescue your life. Because I want to enjoy the time I have left with my mom, and I'm doing that now because I've learned this. It's a terrible disease, but don't let it wreck your family. Good luck to you. Thank you very much.